I want to say thank you to our presenting sponsors. You can see their logos on the screen. They have been just wonderful supporters, not only of the show, but to our sector at large. So thank you so much. Please do, there's some ways that you can help us keep this show free for so many of you because our sponsors step up to the plate. So give them some love, share their organization, go and like their pages, as well as share with more people about the nonprofit show. That would be really helpful for us. So thank you so much. And it's so good to be back with you, Julia. Julia Patrick, of course, the CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy. And I get to join her as her very fortunate co-host, Jarrett Ransom, her nonprofit nerd, your nonprofit nerd, the nonprofit nerd. That also comes from Julia.
It does.
President and CEO of the Raven Group. And we are so thrilled to have back Rick DeBruhl with us today with a new book that has been published. And yes, thank you, Julia. She has it in hand. And so Rick, welcome. So glad to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's always fun to appear on anything where I can talk about the great stuff that organizations do, and especially with nonprofits. I spent 10 years of my career working at a nonprofit as the communication person, and I know how hard it is to get the message out.
Well, and I've seen you, Rick, during the pandemic, of course, virtually on stage, presenting for nonprofits as their MC and host of many of these virtual events. So kudos and thanks for all you do in our community.
Oh, thanks. It's always a pleasure to work with them.
Yeah, it's really an amazing thing. And, we talk all the time, Rick, about why it's so important to have a professional deal with your organization in any type of communications. And we consider galas and events, and now virtual galas and events, a big part of that. But one of the things that we were really interested about getting you back on is how we can do better when we're working with the media. And the Insider's Guide to Media Training that you've just done, what I love about this book is it's like it was written yesterday, because it goes into the details of how we are having to deal with things virtually.
Yeah, I mean, the subtitle is, 99 tips, for your interview in the digital age, because the reality is things have changed right now. I mean, just look at how we're doing this through Zoom, and more and more interviews are being done through Zoom. There's more podcasts, all that kind of stuff. So, the things that we would have given as advice 10 years ago, frankly, have changed, and we need to adapt.
Right. So talk to us about, let's start there. Like, how has the media changed? And I think a lot of these changes weren't just because of the pandemic. I mean, we were already rolling towards that in the media. What are some?
Yeah, absolutely. I spent the first 32 years of my career working in local TV news. And so I understand that world very well. I still have a lot of connections to that world. 30 years ago, it was very simple. I mean, really there were just the main broadcast stations. There was a newspaper and there was radio, is what we refer to as legacy media. Well, now there's all this new media. I mean, we're here on a podcast. There's different kinds of podcasts. There's blogs, there's vlogs, there's YouTube channels, all of the stuff that goes on. And I often point out that there's really 4 different kinds of media. And I refer to it as PESO, P-E-S-O, PESO, the P in PESO stands for paid. That's something you would pay for, an advertisement. E is earned media. I'll get back to that in just a moment. S is social media. Those are the things you're putting out on your own, social media avenues. Mm-hmm. And then O is owned media. That's your website. But that E is so important, earned media. That's where you get the opportunity to be on somebody's TV show or somebody's podcast. You don't have to pay for the privilege to be there. Somebody's giving you the opportunity to give your message out. And so it becomes, okay, what's the best way that you can effectively take care of that? And that earned media is so critical, whether it's being on a local TV station, in a local newspaper, but how can you leverage that and use that to your advantage?
Mm-hmm. That is brilliant. And I love that you use PESO. Before we even went live on today's show, we talked about acronyms, and I would think that PESO would be an acronym, but really it means money, or that is the currency of money in some countries. And so I just love how you've connected that. And I just think it's brilliant. And I would have never thought of, I mean, of course, social media, but that is a huge piece of our world today.
Well, and so here's a perfect example. I'm on the board for St. Joseph the Worker here in Phoenix, which is a great organization helping put people back to work, dealing with a lot of homeless people coming out of prison, that kind of thing. Last night, they were on the local ABC affiliate. They pitched a story. It was a great story. And I can go talk about some of the more details and maybe a little bit later in terms of in this podcast about, what they did right, how to improve it. But the important thing is once the story aired, well, you got the audience of whoever watched it at that moment. Then what you want to do is you want to take it and spin it out on social media. Take that link on the ABC 15 website and post it, connect to ABC 15, plug ABC 15 so that they'll in turn plug you. And as a result, you take that earned media where you had 60, 70, 80,000 people watch it last night. And then you spin it out for maybe your board members, your big supporters. And now you've spun it in such a way that you're getting even more use out of it.
Brilliant. And I've learned so much from Julia. She talks about repurposing, and not just repurposing, I should say, having multi-purposes for one piece of information. So don't just do something once, make sure that there's multiple uses for that. And so that is a perfect example. Thank you for sharing.
And we break down media into what we refer to as legacy media and new media. Legacy media is broadcasting, traditional TV stations, radio, traditional newspapers, traditional magazine. New media are podcasts and blogs and vlogs and YouTube channels. And the reality is that they both have their advantages and disadvantages. And so you don't want to discount one over the other. And the important thing to remember is, well, people think, I get all my news, now these days I get all my news from Twitter. Yes, but a lot of the times what's happening is that information you're getting first appeared on a legacy media channel. It appeared in a newspaper, it appeared at a TV station, and then it gets reposted through a social media or a new media platform. So you don't want to discount legacy media. If they come calling, boy, you want to be able to do that interview with them. You want to be able to get on that program so that it then gets repurposed in those other avenues.
Right. And I'm so appreciative that you brought that up, because that is really true, that there's never anything that's just done once, and if you think that way, you're really missing the boat, because I think the voice that legacy media brings to a story is huge. If you can post something up on your website or through your social media channels where, let's say, Rick DeBruhl is interviewing you, the credibility just skyrockets. I mean, it's so much more powerful.
Absolutely. And, as I always point out, make sure you link it to that reporter, and that reporter in turn will spin it out a little bit more. If ABC 15 is involved or 12 News, they'll spin it out just a little bit more beyond that. So make sure you make those links and take that earned media, that story that was done on you, and figure out new ways to repurpose it and move it forward. And it goes back to, of course, we're talking about media training. That's why you want to nail the interview while you're in the middle of doing this. So the message that gets into that story is exactly the message you want to get out.
Right. So let's talk about that, because this is one of the things, and we were chit-chatting about that a little bit earlier before we actually went live. And that is, I hear all the time from folks, they get so frazzled because they spent 45 minutes or longer with a media outlet, with all the drama, all the excitement, all the stress. And then the the piece package, as we say, comes down to like 90 seconds.
Well, so the story that I was telling you about that aired about St. Joseph the Worker last night on ABC 15 here in Phoenix was about 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes or so. The executive director was interviewed, and his two sound bites together couldn't have been more than 15 or 20 seconds long in the entire story. Now granted, it was a Zoom interview. I'm sure they sat him down, they talked to him for a period of time, and 20 seconds, that's all he got. But he nailed it. I mean, he knows how to create a soundbite. He understands that concept of, okay, I'm only going to get a limited amount of time. I want to say something in such a way that the reporter is going to feel compelled to use it in their story. In the book, we talk about what would your headline be? WWYHB.
I
And what
love
you
it.
want to do is you want to think about before the story starts, you want to think about what would your headline be? If this was going to be in a newspaper, what would they say? CEO embezzles money,
Right.
man bites dog, whatever
Yeah.
it may be. How can you take your story and boil it down to its most basic concept? And then from there, you want to start building, okay, if that was my headline, what would my 3 sound bites be below that? And sound bites get a bad rap. Everybody hates sound bites because, they only use 10 seconds of me. But the reality, that's the way our brain thinks. We think in terms of sound bites. Newspapers use them as quotes. So what you want to do is you want to think, okay, what can I do and say it in 10 or 15 seconds in such a way that'll be compelling and drive the audience? And if you, and you don't want to be thinking about that while you're in the middle of the interview. You actually want to prep it out beforehand. At the back of the book, we even have a worksheet that has, what would your headline be? And then what would your sound bites be?
Right. I think one of the reasons why I love this book, obviously I've spent my life in media and print media, but it's very digestible and very tangible, and that going through this, it's like, okay, yeah, I can take this aspect. And I saw, Rick, a lot of bleed over just into straight communications. Like this, you practice some of these things, you're going to be a better communicator with your donors, with your community, with your funders, with your employees. It's not just a media approach. It's really common sense, I think.
Yeah. And think about this, we're really big on making sure that you prep before the interview.
Yeah.
Because, if you were doing a presentation before a board of directors, before a group of stakeholders, before an audience of potential consumers for your organization, you would think, you'd work hard on the PowerPoint. You'd think, how am I going to say something? And I'm always amazed that people will just walk into their interview and kind of go, okay, what are we going to talk about? It's like, no. I mean, so think about this. I wrote together with Kevin, I wrote the book on media training. Before I did this interview, I sat down and I put down all the key points that I thought I really wanted to work into this. If I don't know this by now, I'm in big trouble. But you know what? It's good every now and then, right beforehand, to sit down and think, okay, what would my headline be? What would my key points be that I want to work out? If you don't do that, because what's going to happen, this interview is going to go out and it's going to be on TV or it's going to be in the newspaper. And potential investors, potential donors, potential board members are going to see it. And this is your opportunity to reach out. I'll give you a good example. When I was still working in TV news, I did a story about an organization it's called Open Arms Home for Children. It's a guy and his wife here in Phoenix who started an orphanage in South Africa. It's an amazing organization, openarmshome.com, if you get a chance. And I did a story about them. And it aired one night. We actually went to South Africa, came back, because that's where the orphanage is. It aired one night. There's a gentleman happens to be visiting in town for something. He's sitting in a hotel in Mesa. He watches the story that night, is so overcome with what this organization does, he writes them a $10,000 check that night, just after seeing the story of what was done. That's the opportunity that you have in getting that earned media. And he later went on to become an even bigger donor for the organization. That's the reach. You don't want to blow that.
And that happens so often. Thank you for sharing that example. And, I've heard of multiple scenarios that something like that has happened. There was a tiny news clip. There was something on, a media channel that really sparked and ignited someone's desire to give in a very, very large way. It's just made a transformational gift for these organizations. But switching gears here, what I'd like to say, Rick, is what I've noticed, and I have a 10-year-old son, so I talk to him a lot about his own digital footprint. But I think about how these pieces, like this news article from last night from your, your organization that you referenced, it will stay in perpetuity for a long time. Right.
Yeah.
So
that's why you want to get it right.
Right. So we're not just talking like, our circle of influence today. This could be years down the road when you look up the organization and you see it in their digital footprint.
Yeah. And So one of the points I always make, people have a lot of opinions about the media, right? People always say, "Oh, I hate the media," or "I love it," whatever it may be. The first thing, whenever people say, "Oh, I hate the media," I'm like, "Well, what media do you hate?
Yeah.
Do you,
Thank you.
is it Sean Hannity and Rachel Maddow that you hate? Is it a local news? Because just because these various people are on TV doesn't mean, as I always point out, Sean Hannity and Rachel Maddow are not journalists. Okay. They're not supposed to be journalists.
Right.
They are talk show hosts. They are entertainers. They're there to create ratings. A local news journalist is a totally different creature than what those people are. Yes, they're part of the media, but that's why first thing you want to do is you want to understand who's interviewing you. Why are you going on this show? And I would say, it's almost always something you really want to do. You just have to understand who's that person. Why are they interviewing you? In local news, pretty easy. They've got editors and they've got code of conducts that they have to, you may like or dislike that local outlet, but in general, it's going to be pretty simple. If it's a blog, if it's a podcast, then generally there's a particular direction that host or those hosts want to put the program into. Now, this one, it's easy. It's the nonprofit show. It's great. We know what this is about, but sometimes they're more political. Sometimes they're more agenda driven. People always say, "Oh, reporters, they have an agenda." My co-author, Kevin Riggs, and I joke about the fact that most reporters don't have an agenda. They have a deadline. They are desperate to get their work done before whatever there are some news organizations that require reporters to file. So let's say we call spot news happens, where an event happens. They're on their way out. They have to file their first story before they get there.
Yeah.
Well, how hard is that? So they meet these deadlines of noon, 5, 6, and now they've got to be online as soon as possible. Most of the mistakes they made aren't because they had an agenda. They walked in the door saying, I know I want to do this. It's because they just ran out of time. They put in 3 phone calls, 2 people called them back, so they talked to those 2 people. Now, it doesn't mean that most reporters want to get the facts right. That's their goal. When I'm talking about journalists here, they want to get the facts right. The problem is, and I had this happen all the time when I was in the news business, call up somebody at 10 o'clock in the morning and they'd say, and they wouldn't get back to me until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I'd say, I can't help you now. My story's already written. I went out, shot everything. It's done. Yeah. Maybe if you give me a fact or 2, I might be able to include it. But if you get a call at 10 o'clock in the morning, call that reporter back immediately and say, how can I help you improve your story?
So Rick, sorry, Julie, I have a question about, the reporters, media, whomever have an agenda. So what if there's something that you don't want to say on air or in your soundbite? We talk about, like maybe we say no comment. Is there a problem with that? What are the pros and cons kind of I want to say, like, politically responding to a question that you're not quite ready to answer publicly?
Well, the first thing I'll tell you is to say no comment is the kiss of death. If you say no comment right off the bat, the audience, everybody assumes you must be guilty.
Sure.
And as I often point out, because I do media training and I do crisis communication work, that there's plenty of ways to comment without commenting. You can have something that's, and let's go back to the vast majority of stories that are going to be done about a nonprofit, quite frankly, are going to be positive. Like the story last night is about this organization that finds people jobs. It's great. Now, every now and then something bad happens. It's the Boy Scouts and it's talking about, issues with sexual assault or whatever it may be, or it's the Catholic Church or what. And when those things happen, your CEO, your executive director did something wrong, sexually harassed somebody, embezzled money. Those, quite frankly, are the minority. But when they happen, if you don't allow yourself to become a part of the story is going to be written without you.
Right.
And as a result, you lose the opportunity to have whatever input. Now, as I often point out, there's plenty of ways to say, something bad just happened. Our thoughts and prayers are with the family of those affected by this. We are looking into the situation to make sure we understand exactly what happened so that we can ensure that it doesn't happen again going forward. Right. Now, that statement I just said was a statement, but it didn't really say a lot, right? It wasn't no comment, but it showed that the organization had empathy, that we accepted something happened. If there's responsibility, we'll accept that responsibility, that we're looking into it and we're looking forward to figure out how we can improve it. And it makes you look like, okay, we at least tried. The organization is going to say, okay, the reporter is going to say, okay, I can stick that. I can use that as part of the soundbite, or the quote in the print version. There's plenty of ways to say no comment without saying no comment.
You know, Rick, one of the things I'm always fascinated by is that that piece of ownership when you're communicating with the media. And I would say that was kind of like what you just said was almost a piece of ownership, saying, you know, we acknowledge the problem and we are working through the process. And there's nothing wrong with saying, I don't have an answer right now, but we're working on it, type of a thing. Because I think that it communicates integrity and authenticity, which in a crisis is really a critical piece. And I'm wondering if you could kind of talk about that.
Sure. First and foremost, and we talk about this in the book, first and foremost, the thing that is most critical, whether it's an easy, good interview or a complicated problem interview, is that you've got to be honest, right? You've got to tell the truth, because in these days of WikiLeaks and, plenty of ways to research things, odds are it's going to come back to bite you if you don't tell the truth. Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean you have to tell everything, right? Just because you know something doesn't mean it has to be communicated. Now, if you're asked a direct question, you have to give the best answer you can. But sometimes the answer is, you know what, we're still working on finding, we believe we may know some of the issues, but we don't know all of them. And before we go down that road, we want to make sure we have a better answer. Now, it's not enough to say, and I know organizations have tried to do this, well, we're still looking into it. It's like, you got to tell me something. I'm a reporter. I'm calling you at noon because something went wrong in your organization. I'm saying, you got to give me something. Don't just say, I can't talk to you because we're still looking into it. That story is going to be written without you. And if you, and I will tell you, people will say, well, they're going to write whatever they want anyway. Honestly, I can tell you that's not the truth. I was a reporter for more than 3 decades. My co-author was a reporter for more than 3 decades. I still do broadcast work. I still do all that kind of stuff. And I can tell you that we don't just write whatever we want to write. We try to take in that bits of information and build the story. Now, just because you think something doesn't mean that it lines up with what everybody else said. But the point is, if you take the moment and take the opportunity to add something to that conversation, you can change it. I can't remember the exact story, but there was a story on 60 Minutes last year where the CEO, it started off as like a negative story, and the CEO did a masterful job during the interview of changing the course and saying, look, you came to me because you thought I was the problem because of this. Let me show you why it's the system that's the problem. Our organization is working within the system. There was actually a great interview the other day on NPR with the guy who's the head of the president's task force on coronavirus. We're talking about, well, why aren't we going to be able to get all these vaccines out and vaccinate people in this period of time? And instead of being a negative interview, this guy spun it into a positive. And he's talking about how the heroic efforts that have been going on. And he showed how, it's great to say, we want to vaccinate everybody by Sunday, but we just can't do the logistics of getting, I was talking about testing is what it was. He says the logistics of getting the physical logistics of it are so difficult. But then he spun it into, and this is called bridging or pivoting, where you take the negative and turn it into the positive and say, but look at the heroic efforts that these people are going through.
And I think that's a great point to make, that we all have that capability, right? And that really comes through preparing with what is it that you want to say. By the time that this interview is done, this communication piece is done, what is your goal? And so I think when you come to that with, as you shared us even physically with your notes, Rick, like these are the points that I want to address. So even if the question is asked in a way that maybe could go down a negative, path, how might we shift that and into that heroicism manner, I think is so great. And
one of the points we make in the book is we're really big on answer the question. And I think when we watched the debates, the Democratic debates this year, sometimes it would infuriate me at the beginning of the debate, especially because the moderator would throw out a question, and it was obvious that the candidate had a plan. I'm going to talk about this, but the question was over here. It's like, first off, if you, and there used to be a school of media training that said, don't worry about the question, answer whichever way you want. I'm a huge believer that could take you down the wrong path. And it'll work if you've got a rookie reporter, somebody who's not very good, because he'll ask the question, you'll answer whatever you want, and he won't get back to it. But a good reporter will start going, well, ask the question again, ask the question a third time. And you've seen this before, right? You've seen it on live television where people get asked the question over and over again. At some point, you just have to answer the question. It doesn't mean, going back to my point, you have to tell everything. You can make that point that, look, we're trying to figure out the answer to this, but here's what I can tell you, or here's the positive that came out of it, or here's how our team is working through to solve whatever that problem may be. So take it, it's called bridging or pivoting again, where you answer the question and then you pivot or you bridge to the information that is your message.
So I was doing a podcast, and we were really trained to say, to not negate what the other panelists may have said. And so it's yes, and.
Yes.
And that was really the bridging for us was, okay, we're all in this together. So I'm not going to compete with what Julia believes. So it's a yes, and.
Yeah. And I mean, you think about it, you want the audience, the people who are either watching, listening, reading, you want them to think that you're a rational, reasonable person with good perspectives and that your organization is a great organization. So it's like, what's the best way you can bring that forward? You think arguing with the guy next to you, is that really going to be the best way you can do it? Now, granted, in politics, we see a lot of that these days. And for some politicians, it works. I would argue for others, it doesn't. And so you have to think, I do say that when you're on a podcast with multiple guests, it is a competition, right?
Yeah,
I mean, there's only so many minutes and you want to get your message out. But that doesn't mean you have to talk over them. It doesn't mean you have to disagree with them, unless that's the format. I used to do a political talk show, and we wanted people to have those disagreements and that fun, interchange going on. That's a different scenario. But if you're just a podcast guest, then like you say, that's a good point. And it's also a great way for you to get in an extra comment without waiting for somebody to ask you a question.
Perfect.
Wow, Rick. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Here's Rick DeBruhl's information. You can access this book on Amazon. Honest to goodness, this needs to go on your bookshelf and you need to look at it. Not just if you're a Marcoms person, marketing communications person, but if you are ever going to be in front of a media opportunity, it's just great. And it really reinforced what I believe, but it also gave me, as somebody that's been in the print side for 30 plus years, some new ideas and reinforce some new behaviors. So Rick DeBruhl, thank you for joining us. I always love watching you on TV, and of course, because of the car thing.
Yes. Well, I'm really fortunate. I still continue my broadcasting career today. And I was the kid in high school that always had the car magazine tucked in my binder. And the teachers wanted me to stop reading the car magazine. And these days, I'm the voice of the Barrett-Jackson auctions on the A&E network. So I guess I got the last laugh. People pay me to talk about cars.
That is the best. Well, you do a beautiful job, and I love it. Hey, everybody, I'm Julia Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy. Been joined by the nonprofit nerd herself, Jarrett Ransom, CEO of the Raven Group. We want to make sure we give some love to our presenting sponsors. Without you, we would not have this amazing conversation as we do every day. And we are coming up on our 200th episode. So you'll be hearing more about our birthday party coming up. It's this month. It's very exciting. It's kind of shocking that we've been doing this for almost 200 episodes. Jarrett Ransom's got some great new workshops coming up. So check her out at theravengroup.com to learn more about that. If you have any questions, Fridays, ask and answer, and make sure you get to us. You have 4 ways to get your questions to us. The Nonprofit Atlas is going strong. Join us there to find more resources for your nonprofit. Whew. And it's 11:01.
I know. Great job. Thank you, Rick. This was wonderful.
Oh, it's a pleasure, as always. It's always fun to talk about communication, I think about, there's a zillion stories I could tell. In fact, that's my biggest problem is like, okay, what
Which
story
one?
don't I tell,
Yes. Which one to choose?
Well, Rick, you are a treasure, and we appreciate anyone in the media who has blended over into the nonprofit sector, because this is one of the areas that we falter dreadfully in our sector. We need
Yeah, I
this
mean,
type of leadership and help. So thank you for being with us.
yeah, it's tricky, and trying to get your message out is not always an easy thing, especially, it's a complicated media world out there right now.
Yes. Well, check out Rick's new book. Again, I just love it. And it is really going to help your organization, not just within media, but communications in general. As we leave every day, we like to remind everybody to stay well so you can do well. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow.